The original Texas Chainsaw Massacre is one of my favorite films of all time. It's one I hold in a very high regard and often cited as one of my many creative inspirations. Its iconic status is unquestionable, and with how much this movie has been dissected over the years, it should really come as no surprise. But nothing can solidify a legacy in horror quite like expanding into a franchise. Friday the 13th, Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, there are a countless amount of horror movies that were turned into franchises and became household names, and the Texas Chainsaw franchise is one of the best examples of this. I mean, just look at how many timelines this damn series has. But if you ask me, there is one thing that truly sets this franchise apart from the others, and that's just how the subsequent sequels and remakes differ from the original, and that even includes sequels with the involvement from the creators of the 1974 masterpiece. Fast forward to 2020, and it's announced that a new Texas Chainsaw film was in development, and it will be a direct sequel to the original in the same manner as Halloween 2018. With the now in vogue trend of the requel in full swing, it was no surprise when this film was announced. Alas, not all things can live up to the success of their contemporaries, and it breaks my heart to say that this movie fits that bill. Even disregarding the polarizing reception to the initial trailer, this installment has been panned critically while being a mixed bag amongst the eyes of longtime fans like myself. Let's take a look at Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or TCM22 for short. So if you haven't seen this movie yet, beware of spoilers. You've been warned. I'll be the first to admit that I was extremely excited for this movie when it was first announced because of the involvement from Fede Alvarez, who serves as a producer and co-writer. Naturally, I was a big fan of the Evil Dead remake he did in 2013, but this film falls short in so many regards that it's not hard to see why the reviews are so negative. The film takes place almost 50 years after the events of the original, and follows the standard Texas Chainsaw setup of a group of hot teens traveling through Texas and having the misfortune of running into Leatherface, though this time without the members of the Sawyer family that we're so accustomed to. So that means no Drayton, no Grandpa, and no whatever Matthew McConaughey's character was supposed to be. Our main characters this time around aren't anything special, with everyone seemingly being a social media influencer of some sort trying to revive the dying town of Harlow with gentrification. No, I'm not joking. They want to turn this dying little Texan town into a hip, trendy society of socialites. So right off the bat, I wasn't really interested in rooting for them. In fact, most, if not all of them, are pretty insufferable, because they come off as very judgmental and downright selfish in multiple scenes, such as when the characters Melody and Dante attempt to usher an elderly woman out of her own home, leading her to have a heart attack and later die. These disingenuous characters are contrasted by the final girl Lila, who is shown to be a school shooting survivor. We're led to believe that this plot point is integral to her character throughout the movie, but nothing ever really comes from it. No shocker there, really. I mean, this is a Netflix horror movie after all. Eventually, we're reintroduced to the big man himself, Texas's hometown hero and the one and only chainsaw daddy himself, Leatherface. Almost 50 years later, and our boy Bubba has taken shelter in this decrepit children's shelter and started taking care of the owner, who's the elderly woman I previously mentioned. Much like the original, the killings are spurred into action from Leatherface's peace being disturbed by a bunch of dumbass kids. This plot point is so jarring, though, because we're never given a reason for why he would want or have to leave the Sawyer home in the first place. And we all know how much family means to Leatherface.
The Saw is family. It's family. Wait till Granddad hears about this.
I wouldn't necessarily mind this part of the story if we had maybe been shown a flashback or even a brief mention of it in the beginning narration, but it's just another aspect this movie leaves on the table. Though I will say that there really is nothing in this movie that makes me scratch my head harder than the inclusion of the original final girl, Sally Hardesty. I can overlook most of the other flaws in this movie. I mean, every movie has flaws, right? But this feels like a genuine slap in the face. They say imitation is the most sincere form of flattery, but when you copy Laurie Strode's character arc from the latest Halloween, it just feels so cheap and uninspired, and that's really just me putting it nicely. Everything she does detracts from the quality of the film even. She doesn't save anyone, and she only serves to remind us that there's a better movie that this supposedly ties into. I mean, she literally gets thrown into the garbage at one point, so I think her character's inclusion in this movie really speaks for itself. I don't think this is the worst film in the franchise by any means. I think that goes to 2017's Leatherface, and by a wide margin at that. But when you attempt to disregard the previous sequels, yet make the same mistakes as them, it does kind of wear on you as a longtime fan. Now, with all of my plentiful gripes about this movie out of the way, there are actually a couple things I found charming enough to give this movie a second viewing. I really dig Leatherface's new mask design. It really stands out to me. Not only because of the macabre stare of the sagging flesh, but because this is the first time we've seen Leatherface make a mask out of someone that he actually cared for. It really adds to the terror. It's as if he's making these characters stare into the face of their sin, that being having been responsible for the death of an innocent woman. Speaking of death, this may or not be a low-hanging fruit to latch onto, but man, were the kills really good in this movie. I almost don't even know where to begin. The very first kill we see is Leatherface breaking an officer's arm and stabbing him to death with the bone shard. Very abrupt and very gory. The next kill is something I think even Thor himself might be proud of, as after a brief scuffle with Leatherface, the character Richter has his leg shattered and bent at the knee. Ugh, real gross. And it doesn't even end there, because the big man then proceeds to use that hammer to bash Richter's entire head in, and he turns it into ground beef. Real sickening visuals. I mean, just listen to the damn hammer making impact. Leatherface was not having it. But if you ask me, the real piece de resistance is the Bus Massacre. Easily my favorite moment in this movie. This is single-handedly the goriest scene in the history of the franchise, and the practical blood and gore is on full display in this scene as Leatherface is just mowing through this entire bus full of people. Limbs are being severed and tossed aside, people are being cut in half, there is just no shortage of way these socialites are being disposed of, and I think the director knew that this would be a selling point, seeing as how much this was used in the trailers. Surprisingly enough, there are actually a few scenes that stood out to me because of their cinematography, something that I was able to appreciate a little bit more on my second viewing. Sally's investigation of the dark cornfield illuminated only by the high beams of her Jeep and the stormy backdrop make it feel like a journey through hell itself. And the revolving door scene with Leatherface mutilating Dante's face as the door swings back and forth was a shocker. I really did not expect that one to impress me as much as it did. It really does bum me out that these are the only things that I can say I enjoyed about this movie, but what can you do? All in all, I definitely think the movie has more going against it than for it, but I've seen much worse, even within this franchise alone. This movie has been quite divisive since its release back in February, and it's really no surprise why. You have those that enjoy the slasher schlock that this series has degraded into, and bask in the mindless glory kills that Leatherface gives us. While on the other hand, there are the horror purists that don't even bother with any of the movies outside of the original quadrilogy, if that. I'm of the notion that Texas Chainsaw Massacre, as a franchise, should be allowed to rest. With every sequel and reboot, we stray further and further away from what made the original so great. I love schlock as much as the next MB, but when you make a sequel to one of the most prolific horror films of all time, it's going to be hard to live up to the impossible expectations that were set almost 50 years ago, and that's okay. Maybe one day we'll get another good entry in this franchise, but I honestly wouldn't hold my breath. I think we can all look at this movie and agree. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Thank you to everybody who watched this video, and especially the people who have made it this far. I haven't made a video like this in 3.5, almost 4 years, just because I've always been scared of putting my voice and my opinion out there on the internet, and at this point in my life, I just figure it's time to just stop living in fear and just take the leap. I appreciate all of you, everyone that shows me support. If you want to keep up with me, you can follow my Twitter and my Twitch on the graphic here. And in the meantime, I can't wait to see you guys in the next video. You guys take care of yourselves.